The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Westminster Abbey as crowds gathered behind metal barriers. Among the sea of faces, there was an unusual quietness, a collective holding of breath that seemed to ripple through the thousands who had come to witness what would become one of the most profound moments in modern royal history. William stood at the window of Buckingham Palace, his fingers tracing patterns on the cold glass. The weight of expectation pressed upon his shoulders like an invisible cloak. Beside him, Kate placed a gentle hand on his arm, her touch speaking volumes in the silence between them. They had made their decision the night before, after hours of discussion that had stretched into the early morning. What they were about to do would break centuries of royal protocol. But sometimes, they had agreed, humanity must triumph over tradition. The occasion was meant to be a celebration. The dedication of a new children's hospital wing that bore Diana's name. But recent events had cast a shadow over the proceedings. Just 3 weeks earlier, a devastating earthquake had struck a remote region of Turkey, leaving thousands of children orphaned and homeless. The images haunting the news channels had kept both William and Kate awake at night. Particularly one photograph of a 6-year-old girl clutching a torn teddy bear, standing alone amid the rubble of what had once been her home. Kate had seen William's eyes fill with tears when he first saw that image. Without words, she knew what he was thinking. Of his own mother. Of loss. Of children who wake up to find their world forever changed. That night, as they sat in their private study, William had turned to her with a determination she had rarely seen. "We have to do something more than just send aid," he had said. "We have to show them they're not alone." The plan they devised was simple yet revolutionary. Instead of wearing their ceremonial robes and jewels to the dedication, they would dress in simple clothing. William in a plain dark suit, without medals or insignia. Kate in a modest black dress without any royal jewelry. But it was what they would carry that would send shockwaves around the world. As they prepared that morning, Kate's hands trembled slightly as she removed her engagement ring and wedding band, placing them carefully in a velvet box. William did the same with his wedding ring and the signet ring that had been passed down through generations of Windsor men. These rings represented not just their personal union, but centuries of royal tradition and privilege. To appear without them at an official ceremony was unthinkable. Their staff had tried to dissuade them. Private secretaries had drafted memos outlining the potential diplomatic implications. Palace advisors had scheduled emergency meetings. But William and Kate remained resolute. In their hands, instead of the usual ceremonial items, they would each carry a simple wooden box containing letters, hundreds of letters written by British children to the orphaned children of Turkey, along with a promise that would change lives. The car journey to Westminster Abbey was silent. William held Kate's bare hand in his, both of them aware of the magnitude of what they were about to do. Through the tinted windows, they could see the crowds growing larger, the anticipation building. Royal watchers had their telephoto lenses ready, expecting to capture images of Kate in a stunning new outfit, perhaps debuting a new piece of the crown jewels. As they stepped out of the car, a murmur ran through the crowd. Something was different. Where was Kate's famous sapphire engagement ring? Why was William not wearing his military uniform? The absence of these symbols was so stark, so unexpected, that for a moment, the crowd fell completely silent. Kate moved with quiet grace, her bare hands visible to all, as she carried the simple wooden box. William walked beside her, his own hands equally unadorned, carrying his matching box with the solemnity of a pallbearer. The photographers' cameras clicked frantically, but there was confusion in the air. This was not the royal couple they were used to seeing. Inside the abbey, dignitaries and invited guests rose to their feet as the couple entered. The Archbishop of Canterbury, prepared to deliver his carefully scripted welcome, paused mid-breath as he noticed their appearance. The usual pageantry, the traditional ceremony that had been rehearsed for weeks, suddenly seemed out of place. William stepped forward to the microphone, and his voice, when he spoke, carried a tremor of emotion that would be replayed on news channels around the world. "Today," he began, "we stand here not as prince and princess, but as parents, as human beings who have been deeply moved by the suffering of children who have lost everything." He paused, looking at Kate, who nodded encouragingly. My mother, William continued, believed that the greatest privilege of position was the opportunity to shine light on those whom the world might otherwise forget. Today, in her memory, and in honor of the children who have no voice, we make this pledge. Kate then stepped forward, her voice clear despite the tears that threatened to spill. We have removed our rings today as a symbol, she said, these circles of gold that represent our bonds, our privileges, our unbroken lives, seem hollow when we think of children whose lives have been shattered, whose families have been torn apart. The silence in the Abbey was absolute. Even the photographers had stopped their clicking, mesmerized by the raw humanity of the moment. Kate opened the wooden box she carried, revealing the stack of letters inside. These are letters from British children to the orphaned children of Turkey, she explained. But they are more than letters. Each one represents a commitment. A British family willing to sponsor, support, or even adopt a child who has lost everything. William opened his own box, revealing official documents. The Royal Foundation, he announced, will personally ensure that every orphaned child from the earthquake receives education, health care, and most importantly, love and support for as long as needed. Not as a charity, but as a promise from one human family to another. What happened next would be captured in a photograph that would define a generation. William and Kate, standing side by side, raised their bare hands toward the crowd outside, visible through the Abbey's great windows. The gesture was simple. Hands, without rings, without symbols of status, raised not in royal wave, but in human solidarity. The effect was immediate and profound. In the crowd outside, people began to remove their own rings, raising their hands in response. The gesture spread like wildfire. From the front rows to the back, from Westminster to social media streams around the world. Within minutes, Number Rings Off had become a global movement, with people everywhere removing their jewelry in solidarity with the orphaned children. But William and Kate were not finished. As the ceremony continued, they made their way not to the royal seats reserved for them, but to a section where a group of Turkish refugees had been seated. Without hesitation, they sat among them. Kate, embracing a woman who had lost 3 children in the earthquake. William kneeling to speak eye to eye with a young boy who clutched a worn photograph of his parents. The official ceremony proceeded, but all eyes remained on William and Kate. Their simple act of removing their rings, of choosing humanity over protocol, had transformed what should have been a routine royal engagement into a moment of profound global unity. Photographers captured Kate wiping tears from her eyes as she listened to stories of loss and survival, William's hand on the shoulder of an elderly man who had lost his entire family. As the dedication concluded, William and Kate stood once more. This time, when they raised their hands, they were joined not just by the crowd outside, but by everyone in the Abbey. Dignitaries, religious leaders, refugees, and citizens alike. The image of hundreds of ringless hands raised together became the defining photograph of the decade. The walk back to their car was different from their arrival. The crowd was no longer held back by barriers. People pressed forward, not seeking autographs or selfies, but simply touching the couple's hands, murmuring thanks, many with tears streaming down their faces. Kate stopped frequently, embracing strangers, accepting letters pressed into her hands, while William spoke quietly with those who approached him. One moment, captured by a single photographer and later shared billions of times, showed a small Turkish girl, no more than 5 years old, reaching up to touch Kate's bare ring finger. Kate knelt down, and the child whispered something in Turkish. Though Kate didn't understand the words, the meaning was clear as the little girl placed a small wildflower in Kate's hand. A symbol of hope growing even in the darkest circumstances. The impact of their actions rippled outward immediately. Within hours, donation centers were overwhelmed with people bringing jewelry to be sold for earthquake relief. Schools organized letter-writing campaigns. Families across Britain and beyond opened their homes to refugee children. The simple act of removing rings had become a global symbol of putting humanity before status, compassion before protocol. That evening, as William and Kate returned to Buckingham Palace, they found thousands of people gathered outside, all with their hands raised, rings removed. The silence was profound. No cheering, no singing, just a powerful moment of collective human solidarity. William and Kate appeared on the balcony, and for several minutes, they simply stood with their hands raised, tears flowing freely as they looked out at the sea of ringless hands raised back at them. The palace staff would later report that both William and Kate were emotionally exhausted by the day's events. They had broken protocol in a way that would have been unthinkable for previous generations of royals. But as they stood together in their private apartment that night, looking at the thousands of letters that had already begun arriving from around the world, they knew they had done something far more important than maintaining tradition. The days following the Westminster Abbey ceremony transformed the global landscape in ways no one could have anticipated. News outlets worldwide led with the image of William and Kate's raised, ringless hands. But it was the human stories that emerged in the aftermath that truly captured the world's heart. In a small cottage in Yorkshire, elderly Margaret Thompson sat watching the news coverage with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. She had lost her grandson in Afghanistan 5 years prior, and his death had left her bitter toward a world that seemed to celebrate wealth and status, while forgetting those who sacrificed everything. But seeing the future King and Queen of England remove their symbols of privilege to stand with orphaned children stirred something deep within her. With trembling hands, she removed her own wedding ring, worn for 63 years, and made her way to the local charity shop. "If they can do it," she told the surprised volunteer, "then so can I." Her donation, along with her story, sparked a movement among elderly Britons who began donating jewelry that had been in their families for generations. Meanwhile, in the devastated regions of Turkey, the impact was even more profound. Aish Demir, a relief worker who had been struggling to maintain hope while caring for hundreds of orphaned children, watched a translated clip of the ceremony on a volunteer's phone. When she saw Kate's tears as she spoke about the children, something broke inside her. For weeks, she had felt like the world had forgotten them, that their tragedy was just another news cycle that would fade. But here were two of the most privileged people on earth, stripping away their symbols of status to say, "We see you. You matter." The letters that William and Kate had carried in those wooden boxes began arriving at refugee camps within days. Each one was personally delivered by British volunteers who had flown to Turkey at their own expense, inspired by the royal couple's gesture. The sight of 8-year-old Mehmet opening a letter from a boy named James in London, complete with hand-drawn pictures and a promise of friendship, encapsulated the human connection that had been forged. But it was the follow-through that truly demonstrated the sincerity of William and Kate's commitment. True to their word, the Royal Foundation immediately mobilized resources on an unprecedented scale. Within a week, teams were on the ground in Turkey, not just providing aid, but beginning the complex process of matching orphaned children with British families who had volunteered to help. Kate personally video-called with many of these families, offering support and guidance, while William worked behind the scenes to cut through diplomatic red tape. The ripple effects extended far beyond the immediate crisis. In corporate boardrooms across London, executives who had watched the ceremony began questioning their own priorities. James Morrison, CEO of a major investment firm, stood up during a board meeting and removed his Rolex and gold cufflinks. "If our future king can put humanity before status," he declared, "then what excuse do we have?" By the end of the week, of needed, his firm had pledged to donate half their annual bonuses to earthquake relief and established a permanent fund for orphaned children's education. Schools across Britain embraced the movement with remarkable creativity. At Street, Mary's Primary in Birmingham, children organized a Rings for Rights campaign, collecting costume jewelry to sell for charity, while learning about the importance of human dignity over material possessions. Their teacher, Mrs. Patel, was moved to tears when 6-year-old Sophie stood up during assembly and announced she was giving up her birthday presents that year so the money could go to the children who have no mummies or daddies. The movement spread across social media with organic authenticity that no marketing campaign could have achieved. People from all walks of life began sharing photos of their ringless hands, along with personal stories of what the gesture meant to them. A particularly powerful post came from Maria Silva, a struggling single mother in Brazil, who wrote, I don't have expensive rings to remove, but I have hands willing to help. Today, my children and I will fast for one meal and send that money to help. Because being human isn't about what we wear, but what we do. Within the royal family itself, the gesture created waves of change. The Queen, initially concerned about the break in protocol, was deeply moved when she received a letter from a Turkish grandmother who had lost everyone in the earthquake. The woman wrote that seeing William honor his mother's legacy by choosing compassion over crown had given her the strength to continue living. That evening, the Queen appeared at a private dinner without the magnificent jewels that typically adorned her, setting a precedent that would reshape royal appearances for years to come. Other members of the royal family followed suit in their own ways. Prince Harry, watching from abroad, organized a parallel ceremony in Los Angeles, where celebrities removed their jewelry on stage to raise awareness and funds. Princess Anne, known for her no-nonsense approach, personally led a delegation to Turkey to oversee the establishment of orphanages that would bear Diana's name. Even the youngest royals participated, with Prince George and Princess Charlotte recording video messages for Turkish children their age, teaching them English phrases and songs. The fashion industry, initially thrown into chaos by the sudden rejection of jewelry at high-profile events, eventually embraced the change. Major fashion weeks in Paris, Milan, and New York featured collections inspired by the beauty of simplicity, with models walking runways with bare fingers and necks. Legendary designer Valentina Cortez created a line where traditional jewelry was replaced by temporary tattoos of meaningful words in various languages, with all proceeds going to orphan support programs. The charitable impact was staggering. Within 3 months, the Number Rings Off movement had raised over £500 million globally, but more importantly, it had facilitated the adoption or long-term sponsorship of over 10,000 orphaned children. The Royal Foundations program became a model copied by other nations, with similar initiatives launched in France, Germany, and Japan. Kate's personal involvement went far beyond the initial gesture. She began learning Turkish to communicate directly with the children during her video calls. Photos leaked of her practicing pronunciation late at night, surrounded by language, books, and notes, touched hearts around the world. When she successfully conducted her first full conversation in Turkish with a young orphan named Elif, the video went viral, with millions commenting on how her stumbling but sincere efforts meant more than any perfect royal speech. William, meanwhile, used his military connections to establish a rapid response team for future disasters. He personally trained with emergency responders, learning practical skills that would allow him to provide genuine help rather than just ceremonial presence. Images of the future king learning to set up emergency shelters and administer first aid redefined public perception of what royal service could mean in the modern age. The couple's own children became part of the narrative in touching ways. Princess Charlotte was photographed making friendship bracelets to send to Turkish children, while Prince George organized a toy drive at his school. Prince Louis, though very young, was seen in a video message attempting to say hello in Turkish, his innocent mispronunciation bringing smiles to children who had forgotten how to smile. The impact on William and Kate's marriage was profound and visible. Royal watchers noted a new closeness between them, forged through their shared commitment to this cause. They were photographed holding hands more frequently, supporting each other during emotional moments, and working as a unified team in ways that transcended their official roles. In one particularly moving moment captured at a refugee camp they visited secretly, Kate was seen breaking down while holding an orphaned infant, and William immediately enveloped both in his arms, his own tears visible as he comforted his wife. The criticism, when it came, only served to strengthen the movement. Some traditionalists argued that the royals had overstepped their ceremonial role, that they should maintain the dignity of the crown rather than engaging in emotional displays. But the public response was overwhelming. Millions of letters poured into Buckingham Palace supporting William and Kate's approach, many from elderly royals supporters who wrote that this was exactly the kind of monarchy they wanted to see in the 21st century. International leaders took notice. The United Nations Secretary-General invited William and Kate to speak at a special session on children's rights, where they appeared again without their rings, their hands clasped together, as they spoke about the universal responsibility to protect vulnerable children. Their speech, delivered in alternating segments that showed their partnership, resulted in the passing of new international protocols for disaster response, focusing on orphaned children. The one-year anniversary of the earthquake approached with the world watching to see how William and Kate would mark the occasion. True to form, they chose substance over ceremony. Instead of a grand memorial service, they spent the week in Turkey, living in the same temporary housing as aid workers, their children joining them to play with the orphans who had found new homes. The images from that week, William teaching football to a group of boys, Kate braiding girls' hair while listening to their stories, their own children sharing toys and laughter with earthquake survivors, provided a masterclass in using privilege for purpose. 5 years had passed since that transformative day at Westminster Abbey, and the world had witnessed a fundamental shift in how humanity responded to crisis. The Number Rings Off movement had evolved from a spontaneous gesture into a global framework for compassionate action that had saved and transformed millions of lives. William stood in the same spot where he had once traced patterns on the cold glass of Buckingham Palace, but everything had changed. The room that had once been a formal reception area was now the headquarters of the Diana Foundation for Global Children. Walls covered with photographs and letters from children whose lives had been touched by the movement. Kate entered quietly, carrying a worn wooden box, the same one from that fateful day, now filled with new letters from children who had grown up and were writing to thank them. The Turkish orphan Elif, whose first Turkish conversation with Kate had gone viral, was now a teenager preparing for university in London. Sponsored by a British family who had been moved by the original ceremony, she had written in her latest letter, "You didn't just give us food and shelter. You gave us the belief that we mattered, that our lives had value beyond our circumstances. That gift is worth more than all the rings in all the palaces in the world." The impact statistics were staggering, but it was the individual stories that truly measured success. Over 50,000 orphaned children from various global disasters had found permanent homes. The rapid response teams William had established had revolutionized disaster relief, arriving within hours of catastrophes with not just physical aid, but emotional support systems specifically designed for traumatized children. The Windsor Protocol, as it became known, was now the international gold standard for humanitarian response. Kate's journey with the Turkish language had inspired a global movement of cultural bridge building. She now spoke 5 languages, conversationally, each learned to communicate with children from different crisis zones. Her language learning videos, showing her struggles and mistakes alongside eventual successes, had motivated millions to break down cultural barriers through the simple act of trying to speak someone else's language. Universities worldwide reported massive increases in enrollment for previously undersubscribed language programs. The fashion industry's transformation had proved lasting. The annual Simplicity Gala, which replaced the traditional jewel-heavy Met Gala, raised more for charity in its first year than the previous event had in a decade. Designers competed to create meaningful fashion that told stories rather than simply displaying wealth. The winning design from the most recent gala, a dress made entirely from letters written by orphaned children to their supporters, was displayed in the Victoria and Albert Museum as a testament to fashion with purpose. But perhaps the most profound change was in William and Kate themselves. The couple who had once carefully calibrated every public appearance now moved through the world with an authenticity that had redefined modern royalty. They were photographed shopping for groceries with reusable bags, taking public transportation when possible, and most tellingly, still appearing at all public events without rings. Their hands, once symbols of royal union, had become symbols of human unity. Their children had grown up understanding service not as a royal obligation, but as a human privilege. Prince George, now a teenager, spent his school holidays working in refugee camps. Princess Charlotte had started a global pen pal program that connected privileged children with those in difficult circumstances. Even young Prince Louis, inspired by his early attempts at Turkish, had become fascinated with languages and served as a young ambassador for cultural understanding. The program's success had not come without challenges and heartbreak. Not every story had a happy ending. William and Kate had personally grieved with families whose adopted children struggled with trauma, had held vigils for children who couldn't be saved, and had faced criticism when some initiatives faced obstacles. But they met each challenge with the same philosophy that had guided them from the beginning: transparency, humanity, and persistent hope. One particularly difficult moment came when a scandal erupted around misused funds in one of their partner organizations. Rather than distancing themselves, William and Kate faced the crisis head-on. They personally apologized to affected families, implemented new oversight measures, and used the experience to strengthen the entire network. Their handling of the crisis, marked by accountability rather than defensiveness, only deepened public trust. The royal family as a whole had been transformed by William and Kate's example. Traditional ceremonies now incorporated elements of service and connection. State banquets featured empty chairs, representing those who couldn't be at the table due to poverty or crisis. The crown jewels, while still preserved as historical artifacts, were no longer worn at most events, with the money saved on security and insurance redirected to charitable causes. International recognition had poured in over the years. William and Kate had been jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, which they accepted on behalf of all the families who had opened their homes and hearts. True to form, they attended the ceremony in simple attire, and their acceptance speech was delivered not by them but by a chorus of children who had been helped by the movement, speaking in their native languages with translations provided. The medical impact of their work had been revolutionary. The Diana Children's Hospitals, now numbering over 100 worldwide, provided free healthcare to any child in need. These hospitals, funded by the continuous stream of donations from the ongoing Number Rings Off movement, had become centers of medical innovation, developing treatments specifically designed for trauma-affected children. Kate's personal interest in early childhood development had led to groundbreaking research in helping children overcome early trauma. Education initiatives had flourished beyond anyone's imagination. The Letters of Hope program, inspired by those original wooden boxes, now operated in schools across 150 countries. Children learned empathy and global citizenship by corresponding with peers in different circumstances. Teachers reported profound changes in their students' perspectives, with bullying rates dropping and compassion increasing in participating schools. The economic model they had inadvertently created was studied in business schools worldwide. By redirecting wealth from display to action, they had demonstrated that true value creation came from improving lives rather than impressing others. Companies that embraced this philosophy found that consumers rewarded authentic commitment to social good, creating a virtuous cycle where doing good was also good business. As the sun set on this 5th anniversary, Westminster Abbey once again filled with people. But this gathering was different from any royal ceremony in history. The attendees were not dignitaries or celebrities but families. British families seated next to the Turkish children they had adopted or sponsored. Volunteers sitting with the refugees they had helped. Children holding hands with pen pals they were meeting for the first time. William and Kate entered as they had 5 years before, hands bare of rings but full of purpose. This time, they were accompanied by their children and, most movingly, by dozens of young people who had been orphaned in various disasters but had found new families and futures through the movement. The ceremony was not a service but a celebration, with music from different cultures filling the ancient space. The moment that broke hearts around the world came when Mehmet, the boy who had received one of the first letters, now a young man studying medicine, stepped forward to speak. In perfect English, he told of the day he had lost everything, of the despair that had threatened to swallow him, and of the moment a letter from a British boy named James had reminded him he was not alone. Then James himself stepped forward, and the two embraced as brothers. Their friendship, a living testament to the power of human connection over cultural and geographical divides. Kate spoke next, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. 5 years ago, we removed our rings as a symbol. Today, we see that what we removed was not just jewelry but barriers. Barriers between us and them, between privilege and purpose, between ceremony and genuine service. What we gained was so much more than what we gave up. We gained a global family. William's words echoed his wife's sentiment. My mother believed that every person has the power to make a difference. What we've learned is that the difference isn't made by the power we hold, but by the love we share. Each of you here, each person who removed a ring, wrote a letter, opened a home, or simply opened your heart, you are the true royalty of our age. As the ceremony concluded, something extraordinary happened. Without prompting, everyone in the abbey linked hands, a human chain of connection that included royal and refugee, wealthy and poor, young and old. They raised their linked hands together, and the sight of hundreds of people connected, ringless hands joined in unity, created an image that would define hope for generations to come. The movement that had begun with a simple gesture had become a revolution of the heart. Children who had been saved were now becoming doctors, teachers, and leaders committed to serving others. Families who had opened their homes found their lives enriched beyond measure. A world that had seemed increasingly divided had discovered that removing symbols of separation could create bonds stronger than any ring could represent. As William and Kate left Westminster Abbey that evening, walking hand in hand with their children and the extended family of young people they had helped save, they passed under a new inscription that had been added to the ancient doorway. It read simply, "Where rings once divided, love united. Where privilege once elevated, compassion lifted all." The story that had begun with two people choosing humanity over protocol had become a testament to the power of collective action. It proved that true nobility came not from bloodlines or titles, but from the willingness to see suffering and act, to remove whatever barriers stood between human hearts, and to believe that every child, regardless of circumstances, deserved to be loved. In homes around the world that night, children went to bed with full stomachs and hope in their hearts because two people had dared to remove their rings. Parents tucked in children who weren't theirs by birth, but had become theirs through love. And in a simple apartment in Turkey, an elderly grandmother who had lost everything in the earthquake held the hand of her new British daughter, who had come to care for her, both of their ringless hands intertwined in a bond stronger than any metal could forge. The silent statement made by William and Kate had indeed moved the world to tears. But more importantly, it had moved the world to action, proving that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is to remove what separates us and extend an empty hand, ready to be filled with purpose, hope, and love. Their legacy would not be measured in jewels or titles, but in the millions of lives transformed by the simple recognition that we are all part of one human family, and that the greatest privilege any of us can have is the opportunity to help each other heal, grow, and thrive.